Welcome to HFY Codex. If you love epic sci-fi stories where humanity shines, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for thrilling HFY adventures. Join us and be part of the journey. The Stranger in the Dust, the desert moon of Orus 9, was dry and full of broken things. The wind never stopped blowing dust across the old trading post. Machines lay rusted beside buildings made from metal scraps. Aliens from many planets came here to sell junk and lies. Elias stepped off his old shuttle and pulled his coat tight. He wasn't here for trouble, just a power core to fix his ship. His boots crunched over dry ground as he walked into the market. Smells of oil, fire, and strange food filled the air. Vendors shouted in alien tongues, waving shiny objects and broken tools. Elias kept his head low, ignoring the noise. Then he saw movement in the corner of his eye. A small figure, fast and sneaky, crawled behind a food cart. A vendor turned and shouted, but it was too late. The figure grabbed a fruit and ran. Laughing like a wind chime, the vendor chased but tripped on a box, yelling curses. The crowd began to gather. Angry and loud, Elias pushed through and stood in front of the child. She was small, thin, and dirty, with wild silver hair and bright green eyes. Her face was full of dust, but her smile was wide and fearless. She didn't look scared, only playful, almost happy. The vendor pointed at her and demanded payment or punishment. Elias reached into his pouch and tossed a few coins without a word. The vendor grumbled and left, and the crowd moved on. The girl looked up at Elias and tilted her head. She copied his every move, blinking, standing, even breathing slowly. Elias raised an eyebrow, and she giggled. Tapping his knee lightly, he turned to leave, but she followed. Skipping beside him, he tried to ignore her, but she kept copying his steps, left, right, turn, stop. She mirrored him perfectly. It was both funny and strange. Elias walked back to his shuttle, and she followed without asking. Inside, she looked around with big eyes, touching wires and knobs. "Hey," he said, "don't touch that." She froze, then laughed again, spinning in a circle. Elias sighed and handed her a protein bar. She sniffed it, licked it, then took a big bite with a happy hum. He poured water into a tin cup and gave it to her. She drank fast, spilling half of it down her chin. For the next hour, she danced around the small ship, humming nonsense tunes. She banged tools together like drums and built towers with circuit boards. Elias sat in his chair, watching her with tired eyes. "Where are your parents?" he asked. She just smiled and pointed at herself. Then at him. "No, not me," he said. But she didn't understand. She clapped and sat beside him, leaning against his arm. When night came, Elias laid out an old blanket in the corner. The girl curled up like a cat, hugging a metal pipe like a toy. He watched her for a while, wondering where she really came from. She was too calm for a lost child, too clever for a street rat. But he couldn't throw her out into the cold desert night. He shut off the lights and sat back in his chair, closing his eyes. The wind howled outside, shaking the thin walls of the shuttle. Sometime past midnight, Elias woke up suddenly. The air felt different, cold and heavy. He turned on a small lamp and looked around. The girl wasn't in her blanket. He stood up and found her sitting in the corner, scratching the wall with a metal piece. Strange symbols covered the surface, circles, lines, and eyes. Her back was straight, her eyes wide open but blank. She whispered something in a low voice, words he couldn't understand. "Hey," Elias said, stepping closer. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer, just kept scratching, faster and faster. Then she stopped and slowly turned her head toward him. Her smile was gone, her face pale and still. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she made no sound. Her small body began to shake, her fingers twitching. Elias reached out and touched her shoulder gently. She fell forward into his arms without warning. He caught her, shocked by how cold she felt. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just held onto his coat like a lifeline. He sat down, holding her tightly. Confused and worried, the girl who was playful all day had vanished. And now, in the dark silence of his ship, she quietly broke in his arms. Asterisk cracks beneath her smile. Asterisk Elias did not sleep after that night. He sat beside the small alien girl, holding her gently as she shivered without words. When the sun rose over the scrap hills of Orosnine, the sky turned orange and gold, but her face remained pale and still. She woke with a blink, stretched her arms like nothing had happened, and smiled again like before. She picked up the same broken pipe and danced around the shuttle, tapping it like a toy drum, but Elias could not smile back. He kept staring at the strange symbols she had carved into the wall. They weren't childish scribbles, they were patterns. Too perfect, too sharp, too familiar. He remembered seeing similar shapes in a war briefing long ago, symbols of a species. Erased from history, the girl had drawn them in her sleep. Elias didn't believe in accidents anymore. He watched her closely all day, pretending to work on the shuttle, but mostly studying how she moved. She laughed too loud, like she was copying a sound she didn't understand. She clapped at shadows and giggled when nothing was funny, and sometimes when she thought no one was watching, her eyes would go blank. For a second, like someone was flipping a switch inside her mind that evening. Elias called someone he hadn't spoken to in years, a war medic named Heller, who now lived underground in a hidden clinic. "I have a child," Elias said over the crackling line. "But she's not just a child." He explained what had happened, the symbols, the sleepwalking, the sudden changes. Heller agreed to meet him at sunset near the western edge of the junk fields. The girl followed Elias, like always, bouncing and humming like nothing was wrong, but as they walked, Elias noticed her hand twitching every few minutes. She kept rubbing the back of her neck as if something inside her was hurting. When they reached the meeting point, Heller stepped out of a hidden lift, his face covered with a breathing mask. "What have you brought me?" the old man asked, scanning the girl from a distance. "She doesn't talk," Elias said, "but she remembers things that aren't hers." Heller nodded and pulled out a handheld scanner. The girl didn't resist as he ran the device over her. Head and neck, beeping sounds echoed as data filled the screen. Then Heller froze. His hand trembled slightly. "There's tech inside her skull," he whispered. "Not medical, military." Elias stepped forward. "Are you sure?" Heller turned the scanner toward him. An image showed tiny metal nodes along the base of her skull. "Behavioral programming," Heller said. "This is old tech, outlawed across the systems." Elias looked at the girl, who was now spinning in a circle, giggling as if she hadn't heard a thing. "But she's just a kid." Elias said, "No." Heller said, lowering his voice, "She's something worse. Or something broken." They brought her back to the shuttle just before dark. Elias gave her warm soup, and she slurped it noisily, wiping her mouth with her sleeve. Then she leaned against him again, curling up like a small animal. Elias didn't sleep this time either. He sat beside her, wondering how much of her laughter was real and how much was just programming. Midnight came, and silence filled the shuttle once more. The girl opened her eyes and stared straight at the wall. Her fingers moved slowly toward her neck, scratching softly. Elias whispered, "Loon." The name he'd started calling her in his mind. She turned her head, blinking slowly, and whispered back, "Run." It was her first word, soft and broken, but clear. Elias stood up fast, but the shuttle lights began to flicker. A humming sound came from outside, the kind only stealth drones made. He peeked through the viewport, and there it was. A black drone hovered just above the sand, scanning. The area loon stood now, her hands at her sides, her head tilted like before. Her smile was gone, her body still, like a puppet waiting for strings. Then her arms twitched again. This time faster, like something inside her was waking up. Elias grabbed the emergency medkit and pulled out the one thing that might help, a neurodisruptor. He looked at her, unsure if it would fix her or finish her, but her eyes, her real eyes, looked back at him. Pleading, she wasn't smiling anymore. She was begging. Elias powered on the device and stepped toward her, and Loon did not run. She stepped into his arms, silently trusting the man who fed her, sheltered her, and never asked who she used to be. As the device touched the base of her neck, the shuttle shook slightly. Outside, the drone hovered closer, red light blinking. Inside, the small alien girl took one final breath, and for the first time, Sensi found her. She closed her eyes, not in sleep, but in peace. The midnight truth, asterisk the neurodisruptor, buzzed in Elias's hand. The girl's body tensed, then dropped into his arms like she had no bones. For a second, he thought he'd killed her. Her breathing was shallow, her skin clammy like cold wax, but her eyes opened slowly. Blinking without the empty stare from before, Elias lowered her gently to the floor, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. A weak pulse, but steady, outside. The red scan light of the drone flickered across the shuttle windows. He crouched low, carrying her small frame with one arm while reaching for a metal panel with the other. The escape hatch beneath the floor hadn't been used in years. He pulled it open with a groan, rust scraping like nails on stone. Wind howled into the room as he dropped below, into the service tunnels built long ago by miners. The tunnel smelled of dust, metal, and old fire. He ran with her in the dark, her small hand gripping the front of his coat. She didn't speak, didn't move much, but her eyes stayed open this time when they reached a sealed door. Elias keyed in an old access code. It beeped, hesitated, then clicked open with a hiss. Inside was a narrow passage lit by broken ceiling lights. At the end was a doorway marked with a red cross to Old Medic Station. The Warmanek Heller was already there, gloves on, equipment buzzing. "Put her here," he said quickly, clearing space on the table. Elias laid her down as gently as he could, stepping back, heart pounding. Heller began scanning her again, this time deeper. "What did you do?" The medic asked, not accusing, just curious. "Neurodisruptor," Elias replied. "It was activating something inside her." Heller frowned, checking her vitals and chemical balance. "She's stabilizing," he said slowly, "but it's not over." The girl's body trembled as if her nerves were being pulled apart. Her eyes rolled back, then snapped forward again, focusing on Elias, and then she spoke. I remember," she said in a soft voice like dry leaves. Elias stepped closer. "Remember what?" She looked past him, staring at the ceiling, her mouth trembling. "Cold lights," she whispered. "White suits." "Wires in my head," her voice broke, and her eyes filled with tears. "They made me laugh when I cried," she said. "They said smiling was better." Heller and Elias stood in silence, listening to the words of a child trained to be something else. "They told me to dance when I was scared," she added. "Told me to smile if I wanted to live." Elias clenched his jaw, holding back the fire in his chest. "They used her like a tool," Heller said. "Her implants were designed to suppress emotion during the day and record behavioral data at night." Elias shook his head. "She was acting happy every day and breaking every night." Heller added, "It was the only time her real self could come out, Loon, because now she had a name." Even if only in Elias's mind, reached out her hand slowly. Elias took it without hesitation. I'm not broken, am I?" she asked. He kneeled beside the table, gripping her hand gently. "No," he said firmly. "You were never broken. You were just hurt." She started to cry, but this time without fear. Tears rolled freely, and she didn't cover her face or laugh to hide them. She cried like a real child, not a machine, and Elias let her. He didn't rush her, didn't try to stop her pain. He just stayed there. Her anchor in a world that had tried to turn her into a mask. Outside, alarms echoed through the tunnels. Distant but approaching, they'll come for her, Heller warned. They'll want their property back. She's not property, Elias said, standing tall. She's a person. Heller nodded slowly. Then you better be ready to protect her like one. Elias looked at the girl, her face soft and fragile, but finally real. For the first time since meeting her, she wasn't pretending. At last, the midnight truth had come out, and there was no going back. Asterisk her real name. Asterisk the walls of the old Manek station shook with distant footsteps. Metal echoed with the rhythm of boots, drones, and hunting machines. They were coming. Not for a rescue but for recovery. Loon lay on the table, awake now, but too weak to move. Her small hand still gripped Elias's coat, refusing to let go. Elias looked at Heller, who was packing what little gear he had left. No more time, the medic said, if we stay. They'll find her. Elias nodded, but his eyes stayed locked on the girl. She wasn't crying anymore, only watching with calm. Sadness, do you want to leave? He asked her softly. Her lips trembled. Then she gave a slow nod. They'll chase you forever. Heller warned, they don't forget what they build. She's not a weapon, Elias said. She's a child. He lifted her in his arms. Again, but this time she held on tighter. Not like before when she was scared. Now she held on like she had something to live for. They escaped through an old mining shaft behind the station. The walls were close, and the floor was wet. But it led them away from the main tunnels. Each step was slow, heavy with fear and memory. As they climbed toward the surface, Loon began to whisper things, names, numbers, sounds from her past. They gave me many names, she said, her voice weak, but none of them felt like mine. Elias paused, turning to her. Do you want to choose your own? He asked. She blinked slowly, thinking for a long moment. Then she said, Loon. Why that one? Elias asked gently. She smiled faintly. It sounds like something soft, like night, but not dark. Elias nodded. Then Loon it is, when they reached the surface. The desert sky was beginning to shift from black to pale blue. A new day. A second shuttle waited at the far ridge. Heller's backup escape vessel. Buried in sand for years, he activated it, opening the hatch, air hissing out like a long sigh. Take her far, Heller said, off the grid, deep into the fringe worlds. Elias looked at his old friend. You're not coming? Heller shook his head. They know me here, he said. They'll follow my trail. Not yours. Elias stepped inside, Loon still in his arms, her body warm but calm. She looked up at him and whispered, Thank you. Not for food, not for shelter, but for something much harder, for seeing her when no one else did. The shuttle roared to life, lifting from the sand like a ghost breaking free. Below, Heller raised a hand in farewell, disappearing behind dust and light as stars filled the sky above. Loon rested her head on Elias's chest. She didn't laugh, didn't pretend. She just breathed. Peacefully, finally free for the first time in her life. No one owned her, no one controlled her. She was no longer the playful puppet dancing under commands. She was Loon, a name she chose, a soul now her own, and Elias, the man who saved her not with weapons, but with care, watched her fall asleep under the stars, not as a mission, not as a problem, but as family. The end.